Hello, family, friends, and anybody else out there listening to my fight against leukemia in the last year, about 13 months actually. And I left off video one that I transferred from Fountain Valley Memorial Hospital to the UCI Orange, that actually has a treatment center that fights leukemia of all types, all cancers, but they have a pretty good leukemia program. I was diagnosed with acute lymphocytic leukemia, which is known as A.L.L. There are four primary as far as other types of leukemia. You got CML, chronic myelogenous leukemia, CLL, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, and then the acute versions, acute myeloid leukemia, and mine, acute lymphocytic leukemia, ALL. I pretty much transferred in to UCI on Friday, July 14th. It was like 8 p.m. at night. I had been waiting for a room to clear for about 7 or 8 days. So the doctors in Fountain Valley were getting a little like, if you can't get an open room there soon, we need to look at the other hospitals. And I was like, yeah, no way. No way am I going to City of Hope and Downey or UCLA, USC, or even as far away as like Houston, MD Anderson. Not that they don't have an outstanding program, all of them. I was looking for something a little closer to home, make it easier on myself, my wife, my kids, my parents, because it certainly helped having them closer by. And I think as much as it wore on my wife, the back and forth, it would have been a lot worse if she would have had to travel further, or if I would have had to live in an apartment, which is what some people do when they can't get to a close center, a cancer treatment center. So I checked in Friday. It's about 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and they took me into the room. It was kind of a ghost town in there at that time of night, but there are patients in every room. I went into a double door room, which was, from what I understood, it was sealed off, had a special filtration system to filter out germs, bacteria, viral, things of that nature. It also had something that was up on the door and the side thing, panel that had the nurse that was on duty, but it was listed as it was listed as a neutropenic room, basically meaning that the person that's staying in it, me, has lower than normal neutrophils, which are the type of white blood cells that are crucial for fighting off infections. So they have to be very careful with me. I have hardly any white blood cells at all, so I could catch stuff really easy. Kind of like what I've caught now. I've got a pretty, just kind of a cold and a raspy voice. So it's kind of cleared up, but even though it's been more than a year, my sinuses are real sensitive to whenever there's blooms and things that I normally would be allergic to a little bit are heightened. So I don't enjoy it too much, to be honest with you. So I checked in. Of course, the first thing they did was draw blood and tell me that they were going to be doing vital checks and blood work every 3 hours. So it didn't really matter what time of the day or night. I had to basically, give in. So they drew quite a bit of blood that first night. I was stuck all over, kind of like you see some of the bruises on my arms now. That's from a couple weeks ago, actually, where I had switched. It's been more than a year, but I had a PICC line, and I'll explain what a PICC line is. But they had to switch arms and move it into the other arm. So for 24 hours, they had to draw blood without a PICC line. So that meant needles. So I was like, great. But that's kind of par for the course. I spent that first night. I actually slept. Didn't have an issue with it. I told my wife to go home. I mean, I had a full room that had like a spare couch kind of bed thing, so she could sleep over when it became too much as far as traveling back and forth. or if she just wanted to spend the night. So woke up that morning, Saturday morning, the 15th, had breakfast, and then kind of was hanging out, expected to see the doctor, meet the doctor for the first time later on, hopefully in the morning, early morning, because there's a lot to talk about. They two a team of two members came in, and they had some equipment that I didn't recognize, and so I was like, okay, well, hi, They introduced himself and said, did they tell you about the pick line? And I've never had a pick line. I kind of remember them talking about it with me, but I was not. The retention on certain things. There was so much information coming in. It was like there was hardly anywhere to store it, and plus I was not doing that well, brain wise, functionally wise. So they explained to me that they basically run a line through your under. Or, there's different areas you can do it, but they're going to run it under my arm, into my artery, into my heart. So this made it where they don't have to stick me all the time. They can draw blood from it. They can do IVs into it, chemo, magnesium, anything at all that they needed to transfuse into my body. They could do it, and it had multiple heads, so it could be running chemo at the same time and draw blood. So there was a dual head, so to speak, and down the line, I eventually got a triple head in the other arm, but I'll cover that a little bit later. So I was just like, okay, well, let's go. I had breakfast already, so let's go. Do I need to get in a chair? Do I need to wheel me in the bed? And they're like, oh no, we just do it right there in your bed. So I was just like, okay. I was like, okay, really? So I pulled my gown down, so they put the feeds all over my chest and my arms, so I could see on their screen the mapping of it, and when they're feeding it up through my arm into my artery, and it also had some type of sound system where it could hear the path. Basically, I'm not sure exactly how it works. So, but I got to watch it. But they explained to me, you're gonna feel a little bit burning in the arm when we give you a little bit of numbing. And they asked me, do I need anything to calm me down? Like, I think it was like A.L.L or whatever it's called, A.L.L. And so I said, yeah, it probably wouldn't hurt. I was a little bit nervous about it. And Kim my wife hadn't gotten back to the hospital yet. She was on the way, but she wasn't there. So I was just kind of hanging out. So they did it, and it was right. It burned a little bit, no big deal. But he said the only thing you're going to feel is initially you're going to feel a little bit of a push, but once it breaks through into the vein, you're not going to feel it. And he was right. I didn't feel it, but it was run about 40 or 42 centimeters up my arm and into my heart. So, and currently right now there's a double on my arm. It has to be cleaned and changed every week. Unless there's issues, then it has to be done more. But right now it's been doing fairly well. I haven't had any problems with it. So they did that. The doctors came in. They talked about with my wife there. Talked about the different treatment options, and they're saying, well, we don't know if you want to go ahead and do this. And I was just like, we don't have a choice. We have to do this. It's this or die. It was very aggressive. My blast rates, meaning the infection rate on all my cells, white blood cells specifically, were at 95%. So I was not good. My platelets were below 5, and they were still fighting it every day, giving me transfusions of platelets, and not just hemoglobin, but platelets also. And then, of course, things like when my magnesium's low, they would give me a transfusion of magnesium. So it was kind of a battle. It was every time there was a blood draw, and it could be every 3 to 4 hours. It was what they were doing to me afterwards was based off of the numbers that came back. So we did that. Talked to the doctors. I told them I wanted to start immediately. So they set it up like immediately. It was going to be by the end of the day, I'd be starting the first round of chemo, which was fine with me. I just was like, let's just get this going. The whole process to begin with was just a shock to be diagnosed with leukemia. Uh, all the previous week, in Fountain Valley, hanging out in the hospital there. So the doctors explained to me that I'd be doing it's kind of a staggered process. It's 4 different types of chemo. So it's called hyper CVAD. Uh, so it's done in cycles, usually in 2 parts. But it's the type of, and I'll maybe slaughter it when I pronounce it or try to pronounce it. But CVAD basically stands for the 4 different types of chemo that there is. It's cyclophosphamide, vincristine for the V, adrenomycin, also known as doxorubin. That's how it was explained to me. It was doxorubin, but they have the other medical name for it. And then dexamethasone, I think, if I pronounce it correct. So that's the CVAD. Um, but the whole day before I started, it was just kind of asking a lot of questions, not just with the doctors that had already left, but we talked to him for a very long time. Dr. Kolak, K-A-L-A-C, was my primary. When he wasn't on duty, it was Dr. Brim. So she was kind of his boss, I guess, but also his fill-in when he wasn't around to do the rounds, his days off. So got to know them fairly well. I felt they took very good care of me and explaining stuff. The bedside manner was great for something that was quite technical, and a lot of questions that you didn't have at the beginning. You certainly have now. Once it settles in, you sort of have to things start popping in your head. So I got used to the idea that it was starting at night, but that whole day I didn't know that they were going to be doing some other things. So they came into the room and they had to do a bone marrow draw. So they, also one thing I thought it was going to be done in a surgery room like it was in Fountain Valley, but it wasn't. They did it in my bed. So flip over, and they're going to inject my hip, whichever side I choose on, and they inject it with pretty much numbing. And then they also give a secondary numbing, and they drill into it and suck out the bone marrow, which, it's, if it's not done right, it can be painful. If the painkillers aren't in the right spot, they tap into the bone and inject, basically inject there's a couple different types of painkillers, but, they inject it in there and they drill and pull it out. Once it's done, I mean, I only had one bad experience, and I had like at least 18 bone marrow draws over the 12 or 13 months. So it's not like I didn't eventually get used to it, but there was only one time where it was utterly like I thought I was going to bite my tongue off and holding onto the bed. They're going to rip the rails off the bed. So I told them they had to stop and redo it. But after that first one, which once again I was shocked it wasn't something that was done in a surgery room, but it was just right there in the room with all the machines. The other thing I had to do was my first lumbar puncture, which I was just like, as a kid, I had spinal meningitis. So 6 years old, I don't have a fond memory of spinal tap, so being strapped down with leather, it was just something that stuck in my mind for a long time. So I was a little bit scared. The fellow, technically, some of the doctors had fellows that were following along with them for educational and training for their eventual step into being full blown, doctors of whatever specialty they choose. But he was he just thought Dr. Omid because his name was so different or difficult to pronounce. He just preferred to please just call me Dr. Omid, but it was extremely long, first and last name. But he knew that I was a little bit nervous, but I just sat over the bed, over a table with pillows propping me up, and he was really good. I barely even felt it. So that initial lumbar puncture was only just to pull out the sauce, so to speak, and test it. They're looking for leukemia cells in it because I wasn't aware, but your spine and your brain are a separated system from the rest of your body to shield it from infections, any bacteria, viral things in the nature. So they were testing it to see if the leukemia had gotten through that barrier. And it did come back, no, it didn't. So that was good. Um, but when I did start the chemo later that night, one of the things they had to do was they had to do it again. So I didn't just get leukemia, four different chemos, but they injected the chemo into my spine also in one of the spinal taps, just to play it safe and to give a barrier to a definite barrier. Because if the leukemia would have gotten to my spine and my brain, it might have been a different story for me currently. As in, you know, I was already really bad to begin with, and the last thing I wanted to do was take a surprise dirt nap. So all the pain and stuff, I just kind of had to roll with it, and it worked out fine. It just does it wears on you mentally. You have to keep doing this stuff over and over. But the first round of chemo, it was pretty. I was worried. Like, the one thing was they told me there was no radiation expected. The only way I was ever going to have to do radiation is if all this other treatments I do beforehand were not working. And or if I ever moved to the need to do a stem cell transplant, if this particular chemo doesn't knock out my leukemia 100%. And that's one of the things you always have to kind of know. But I had kind of forgot about that process. I was really thinking this was going to do it, and it would take care of that. So I didn't get ill like I thought I was going to get. Everyone's body reacts totally differently. Like the leukemia affects everybody's body differently. Also, I did not get. I was really tired. And that was the biggest thing I noticed. On the second day when I started this, I think it was vincristine. It was, or it could have been the doxorubin. I can't remember which one it was, but one of the two was a small bag, 30 minutes of feed time, and it was bright red. And the nurses had warned me, hey, when we do this one on you, we're going to have to up your IV speed as far as just the IV hydration solution to flush it out of your system and flush all the other chemo out of your system. So, because it can't just sit, it goes in there, it kills the B cells, leukemia, and then it's supposed to flush out of your system as soon as you can. So they have to run a really high rate. So basically, I was peeing like every 30 to 40 minutes, and we're not talking, little tinkles. I was just like filling up uh, those big the jugs that you pee in on the side of the bed. I was feeling like every 40 minutes, probably a jug and a half easily, if not more. So of course, nighttime it was a problem. I was having to pee so bad there was not a lot of good sleep. But I did get through it eventually, clearing it out. So they turned it down a little bit, the speed, which I was very thankful for. It got a little bit old at first. And, I think I only got an upset stomach one time, and it was when I did one of the red chemos. And it was, it's pretty toxic, I guess, is the best way to put it, to your system. I got a little sick. I had soup. I threw up the soup, and that was it. I don't want to get ahead of it, but the entire next 12, 13 months, I never got sick again as far as stomach wise, and throwing up, which is good. But the one time I did, they just gave me Compassine. They just didn't put it in my IV and it calm my stomach down. And if I ever even got a little bit of an upset stomach, they would just give it to me without even waiting. So that probably helped a lot, but I never really got that kind of stomach ache again. So it wasn't anything that was harsh. So I went through that, and after that first round of chemo, you normally when you do a round of chemo, you're in for 6, 7, 8 days, depending on how your body responds, and you're back out. So I was scheduled for 8 rounds of chemo initially, and it's so I was pretty much knowing it was going to be a long process because they had to kill every single leukemia cell, because all it takes is one cell and it will grow back in a matter of 3 to 4 weeks. It'll be full on raging leukemia again. So I was more than happy, just do it. But because I was in such bad shape, I mean, physically, the platelet counts, I couldn't keep them up. They were constantly having to do transfusions for the platelets. The hemoglobin also very low all the time. The magnesium also was very low all the time. So it was just a constant battle of every time there was blood work that came back. If there's anything alarming, the doctors were all prescribed, do this, do that. So it was a little bit tough. I was very weak. I tried to walk as much as possible. I walked more than anybody else in the unit that I was in. I was on the 7th floor at UCI. They have two units. They have 78 and 76, and there's about 15 to 18 rooms per unit. So it's the treatment area for cancer in general and leukemia, and also any transplant patients that are in there. So I was in the double door for quite a while, and then they did eventually move me to that was 78, so unit 78, but 76 is right next door. So they eventually moved me into the single door after a couple weeks, but it was still neutropenic, so I was still kind of sealed off. Couldn't have a lot of visitors. They only let my mother, my father, and of course my wife. The kids, I think they eventually let them in once, but our concern was that they were, in school, they're exposed to a lot of things, and they were really worried about what they might bring in. So, but eventually, we played it safe and put gigantic body condoms on them and let them come in the room. Just kidding. But they did come in and visit. But, I didn't get to see hardly anybody, wasn't at home anymore, didn't get to hang out with the family, was it just a different world? Even missed my dogs. So Sugar Ray and Captain Jack, boxers. So I pretty much settled in for the long haul, I guess. But it was about 5 weeks that I stayed at UCI in Orange after I did the first treatment. Then they had to monitor me really close for weeks and weeks, and it was a fight up and down. I finally got to the point where things kind of stabilized, and then I became what they call the outpatient. So what happens is when you become an outpatient, you get monitored across the street in the Chow Center, which is specific to cancer treatment for outpatients. And it also has the ATC unit, which is where the stem cell transplant patients get taken care of when they're outpatient also over there. So everyone is like, well, aren't you glad to be out? And I was just like, well, I can barely walk. I mean, I was using a walker. Couldn't take a shower by myself, couldn't hold myself up. My wife had to help with that. So just because you're outpatient doesn't mean it's just tough. I had to go back every day to the child center across the street from the main hospital. So it wasn't easy. Back and forth, I could barely walk. So, we tried the things like valet parking, but then it takes them like 45, 50 minutes to get the car every time. So the waiting for me was tough. I could barely sit up in the chairs in the waiting areas when you're waiting to get blood drawn or tests. So, I could, and then of course, having to go to the bathroom frequently, it was a bit of a struggle. So it wasn't that pleasant. As the weeks went on, I just got a little bit better, but it was still something where I needed like a walker. I just wasn't stable. And of course, when I became outpatient, the room you see behind you became, and it still is, my room. My wife had to move. It was the office before, and it was a kind of a master bedroom downstairs for visitors, and or we kind of turned it into an office, full bathroom, everything in here. But before I came home, my wife had to basically have she hired the cleaners to come in here and completely wipe every single thing down and get rid of everything. And then we put in a HEPA 14 filtration system in here that keeps the room clean as much as possible. Um, I have a nice view. I mean, it's a sliding glass door out to the backyard. So it made me feel a little bit not quite so trapped. Uh, so it was a tough one. But my rounds of chemo were scheduled to happen unless something changed because I was in a bad situation health wise. It was going to be every 3 weeks. I was going to get another round of chemo and then have to stay in the hospital for about 6 or 7 days as they monitored me. And then once I was out again, it'd be like another 3 weeks. You know, of course, it's give or take a few days. It's never exact, but that was kind of the schedule for it all. Um, the second round of chemo was a little bit easier, but I noticed I was a lot more tired. My body is still fighting it. So that was the second round. They did a bone marrow draw again after the second round before I left the hospital, and they sent it out to be tested with Washington University up above us, California. It's one of the few universities that can test for what they call MRD, minimal residual disease. So usually when you have those heavier dose of chemos at the beginning, it usually knocks out the leukemia completely, meaning not only is it not measurable by a machine standards, they're measuring devices, but they can't detect it. Sometimes the leukemia or any disease is below what a machine can test level wise, but it still exists. So it's still there. So that's what happened. So my leukemia was no longer measurable. And I had already had, there were already 8 rounds of chemo scheduled. So, but it was detectable still. So we had long conversations with the doctors, uh, met with the stem cell transplant team that's in the Chow Center also, but they do their rounds across the street for all the patients that are in there and the doctors. And, I met Dr. Conkton for the first time. She was going to be the lead, assuming that I was going to do a stem cell transplant. She was going to be the lead for that, and her boss, so to speak, the one, Dr. Chiria, he and her, Dr. Compton, came from MD Anderson in Houston, which is world renowned for fighting cancers of any type, and especially leukemia with stem cell transplants. So I felt like I was in pretty good hands. This program for them was relatively new, but they were really pushing the development of it, and it's come a long way. And just the other day they announced they did their 200th stem cell transplant. So I was probably in the middle somewhere. I don't really actually know the number, but to me it didn't really care. But so the discussion after round 2 chemo was, do you want to go ahead and move into it? And I just said, well, my wife and I talked about it a lot because there were a lot of details about a stem cell transplant. So we decided to do it, but they just said, well, okay, the whole process will take a while, probably about 6 months before we even get to the phase of doing it. So I still had other rounds of chemos. I had to keep doing the chemo regardless. So every 3 to 4 weeks, I'd start the next round of chemo. But by the time I got to the 4th round, all the details already had been worked out. So it was, onward and upward for that. But I'll get into that stem cell a little bit later. So just I'm going to leave it off here, and thank you very much, and I'll see you on video 3.